And actually, we went back to Sandy Point, which is 20 minutes from Aryan Nation. So we actually went to the property.
Oh my gosh.
33 years since the last time I was there, which was quite powerful. But you know, we heard from student-led initiatives that are happening. So the one school had this program, Nobody Eats Alone. So these students would volunteer groups. They would look for the kids that were socially isolated, that were sitting at lunch by themselves all the time, and went and sat with them. So they, you know, so that these kids, you know, if you look at whether it's Dylan Roof or any of these others, these kids are loners. You know, they're not socially successful people. It's how do we, you know, it's important to call people out, call behaviors out, but it's really important to call people in. And how do we do that for people that are struggling at the margins before they have found an identity which may take them down a path? Another group had another school, this was actually in Idaho, had Hope Squads. And so what they did is they asked the students, if you were struggling with an issue, who in your grade would you go and talk to? Who would you feel comfortable going to talk to them? And they went and identified those kids, asked them if they wanted to join the Hope Squads. I think they're in the schools across the province, and they gave them some really basic skills to learn, and each grade sort of has one. And so there were these peer-led sort of peer counseling things that were happening in the classroom. There's ways to empower the students as opposed to lecture the students or whatever, and get them involved in the process and the healing.
You gave me a lot there. I used to be a high school principal, so those students exist, so I'm going to have to go look for them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. If anyone has a question, it'd be helpful if you could, if at all, go to the microphone so we can hear.
Now, if I can briefly, if I could briefly add to that? Can you folks hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Oh, great. Is another thing that, you know, Tony and I really try and instill with young people and in communities in general is this concept that, you know, compassion's not a passive thing. Compassion takes work. Compassion, you know, when you break it down, Tony likes to say compassion is empathy plus action, which I think is a really valuable tool to remember. And it requires engagement. It requires effort. And there's all kinds of, you know, wonderful programs that schools are developing around this. And in some cases, as part of this learning around the 3 C's, we teach kids pretty basic things. Like we teach kids active listening. We sit them down in pairs and we help them give them the tools, arm them with the tools and the experience to learn how to do active listening, to learn how to really be curious, to learn how to listen instead of just sit and wait for your turn to speak back, to really want to understand that other person and where their ideas come from and why they believe what they believe. And then to also be able to feel that on the other end, right? Like, how does it feel to be heard? How does it feel to be seen for who you are? It's a very, very powerful piece of compassion. And the other piece that Tony talked about, which is it's very difficult to hate someone that you know, is we have sat down and we've done workshops with communities around kind of helping them recognize ways that they can sort of maybe reinvigorate community traditions to create more of a cross-community, cross-cultural, interfaith experience for people within those communities. Sometimes the resources are already in place. Sometimes there's ways to reinvigorate traditions that already exist to bring people together and have these conversations and interactions that are so important.
Yes.
Or I can just take your mic.
One of the things I've heard as a way of students getting pulled into radicalism is a first inquiry on the internet of how do I get girls to like me? Have you found evidence for that? What have you seen for just a very simple, basic thing? And it stems from the idea of belonging and wanting to, be attached to people who care about you. Just wondering if you have any evidence of that or have investigated that at all.
Peter?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the question. It was a little muffled. Could someone ask it, maybe repeat it for me? Tony?
For young boys becoming radicalized, often it starts with a search of how do I get a girl to like me? And what is the evidence or understanding around that?
Around how do I get a girl to like me?
Well, I think they end up in some pretty misogynist spaces. I'm thinking Andrew Tate and stuff like that. I think part of it is we need to learn to have better conversations about masculinity with young men, boys and young men. There's not so much discussion of what healthy masculinity looks like. There's just a lot of discussion about what toxic masculinity looks like. And I think if we're not careful, there's a push and a pull. There's the extremist groups will pull kids like that. In our discourse around the history of our society and how we talk about the patriarchy, we have to be careful that we don't push kids. We don't teach young men that they're wrong for being men or boys or male or whatever. We have to be very careful around those conversations. Those conversations need to be had, but if we don't do them carefully, we will alienate. And there is a crisis of masculinity, and there is a whole generation of young boys that feel alienated. And there's a whole raft of people, just like I was, that know exactly how to lure and pull them in. So we have to be careful about how we have those very important conversations.
I think what Tony's saying is so vital. It's so important. I didn't plan on making a series of films around violent extremism. I fell into it because I was interested in these issues around masculinity, and I've made a series of films around male identity and masculinity, which is precisely how I ended up meeting this group of really remarkable men that helped to create Life After Hate. And I've even told Tony certain anecdotes that I've experienced with my own 14-year-old son. He is also struggling with what does masculinity mean, and he's heard the term toxic masculinity so many times that I think there's a false equation between equating masculinity with toxic masculinity. Not all masculinity is toxic, but young men don't know what that healthy version is. And when my son goes online to explore these things, and sometimes that can be, how do I get a girl? And sometimes it can be, what's it mean to be a man? And sometimes it can be simply asking a question about what toxic masculinity is. Because of these algorithms online, you can go down a rabbit hole really, really fast. And I've had my kid come to me with stuff that he's watching on TikTok and actually say, hey, this is kind of weird, but, some of the stuff that this guy is saying around masculinity makes sense. Or some of the stuff that this guy is saying about, how white history is no longer being taught in his school. And so what scares me the most is young people who don't have the relationships with their kids who are present and curious and are able to have these really crucial discussions to help them unpack this process that they're going through when they're trying to figure things out, right? We all had to figure things out. A lot of us sort of try and black out a lot of, how difficult that figuring out was when we were 13, 14, 15. But there's such pivotal, crucial years. And a lot of this comes back to, parenting, male role models, and how we're having these larger discussions with our children and in our communities.
And I really think that the three of you, that is Peter, Tony, and Estelle, are really speaking the same language, that we really need to start when our kids are little. We need to, it's not, you're right, there are difficult problems of all kinds in families. And it's our responsibility when we get them in kindergarten, even in nursery, to teach them what compassion is. And even healthy masculinity, it begins at home, but it also begins in the school. Yes?
That's right.
The colleges and universities across Canada and the US and many other places are supposed to be places of higher education where we breed good moral ground, and instead we just have a lot of dens of just vile scum, and it's like nobody does anything, and everybody runs rampant, and there's no accountability at any level, especially at the higher levels. And so you go out and you talk to kids in kindergarten and grade 6 and grade 10, and yes, eventually they'll be the people who get to university, but what do you do now? Like, it's horrible to watch that those are supposed to be places of higher education. And yeah, no critical thinking whatsoever. And I mean, even the universities here, it's like nobody cares. And it's like, I wouldn't want to have a child now who had to go to university. I wouldn't even know where I'd want to send them.
What was the question?
Oh, the question is, what do you do when you have universities and colleges where it's the case of almost of evil triumphs when good men do nothing. People just sit around and do nothing, and there's all these activities going on. People feel unsafe. What do you do with institutions of higher education? Like, how do you change that? They're supposed to be the people changing it.
Thank you very much for the question. I do teach there, so I'll just, I don't have answer
It's
to
not
you,
directed at you personally.
but I'm trying to acknowledge that you are very right. And when I teach, I do see reflections here and there, but my observation is that it is a structural problem in almost all of our higher educational institutes, with regards to policies, with regards to the way we structure dialogue between professors and students. And I think the way, let me give you a stat. In my current class, the students are taking 4 to 5 courses in a semester. And where there is a chance, because I teach global politics now, there is no scope of really bringing home the morality values that we discuss about a conflict and where we stand. They are so much overwhelmed with the studies, and just imagine with 5 courses, there is hardly any time to think about anything else other than just finish the assignment and get the grade and go out. I think it's a big structural problem we are facing in our higher education. Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, I would agree in part on that. I mean, I think we've got to be really, really cautious with our assumptions and our language here. I don't believe that nobody cares, and I don't believe that colleges and universities are dens of vile scum. I think that's hyperbole, and it's not my experience. What I do think is that our educational system, it's a reflection of what our culture values. And as we've moved increasingly away from the liberal arts and towards STEM-based education, towards efficient education that's driven by sort of neoliberal objectives, we move away from educating the whole person. We move away from people understanding simple things like civics, from understanding cultural and historical contexts. We move away from critical thinking, right? And I think that's our own doing. Our culture has created that. If we want to see different things in our education system, then we need to get involved and we need to make those changes. And I think there's a litany of things that need to be addressed. But I do think that, you know, I don't think there's a lot of value in finger pointing and trying to cast aspersions on what is merely a reflection of what our culture values. I think we've got to have the guts and have the courage to look in the mirror and say, yep, at least I can, you know, I think, you know, I can't speak for Canada. I'm a U.S. citizen. I see how it works here. But I think there's all kinds of assumptions that need to be reevaluated here. And I think the loss of a liberal arts-based education and educating the whole person, moving away from that comes at a very, very, very high price.
I just want to add, I think also there's a temptation to fix everything that's out there. And it starts with us. Who we choose to be in every moment of every day inspires the people around us and gives them permission to do the same. So in order to get rid of the judgment and intolerance out there, we need to look into our own hearts and see, where do we hold that intolerance? Where are we judgmental? And only by removing it's not a grandiose act from a politician on a white horse that's going to make things better. It's millions of little tiny acts of who we choose to be in every moment of every day, and how, whether we know it or not, we inspire the people around us, for better, for worse. People see what we do and they will take whatever from that and emulate it. So we have to set the example. We have to be the example of the change we wish to see. You know.
Well, and with that, I'm sure that you have some more questions, and I encourage you to speak to our wonderful panelists outside of the reception as you're having some dainties. I want to thank all of you for this amazing presentation. This has been so inspiring at a time when we really need some inspiration. And we just appreciate you being here in person, the two of you, and Peter online. Thank you so much. I just want to say a few more things. We have 3 upcoming programs from the Jewish Heritage Center that I'd like you to know about. The first one is brand new. I hope you'll consider joining us in partnership with a brand new organization called the Jewish Community on Campus. On Thursday, November 23rd at 7 p.m., we'll be presenting a panel of experts to discuss the topic, Anti-Semitism in the Wake of October 7th. Critical perspectives from Jewish scholars, community leaders, and activists. We are proud to co-sponsor this event, and in order to register, you just go to the Jewish Heritage Center's website, jhcwc.org/programs. Next Sunday will be the last of the 4 programs for Holocaust Education Month. It will be presented at the Bernie Theater on the Asper Jewish Community Campus. Dr. Ralph Stern from the University of Manitoba will present 2 Streets and a Synagogue, Urban Encounters in Nazi Berlin. For that one, please register by writing to us at Jewish Heritage. That is the email address, jewishheritage@jhcwc.org, or you can go online as well to our website. And then a very different program on December 4th at 7 p.m., again in the Bernie Theater. We have a program called Jewish Women Talking and Writing, with authors Harriet Zaidman, Carol Matus, and Eva Wiseman, and this will be moderated by Mavis Reimer, professor in the English department at the University of Winnipeg. I want to thank all of you for coming today, for participating, and I invite you into the hallway to continue the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been